Lamar Jackson, CeeDee Lamb, Kyren Williams. These are some of the greatest players in fantasy football this season, and they led you to a championship. We react to the fantasy football playoffs and all your potential MVPs as we begin another edition and another year of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. We're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league year-round to dominate and help you win your fantasy football championships. Congratulations if you did so. And we still have to look at some things here. Maybe start looking back, and to look ahead, we need to know where we were, to know where we're going here in 2024. New year, big things coming, hopefully, and better things in fantasy. And we still have DFS and playoffs and all that good stuff. So we'll break it down for you on the show. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
Well, happy New Year to you, Michelle. And if you won some championships, even a happier New Year at this stage. But look, some of you I know are playing into Week 18, but a lot of leagues have wrapped up in Week 17. And reason why is a lot of teams have wrapped up things, right? We know Christian McCaffrey's not going to be playing here for the 49ers. They have the number one seed locked down. The Ravens are thinking about sitting Lamar Jackson as they have the number one seed in the AFC locked up. So that's why we don't play into Week 18. So we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have some takeaways from Week 17 on today's show, and then we'll look at what they mean overall. I mean, some of these guys that came through for your fantasy playoff teams in the championships and all throughout the playoffs, they also were studs all throughout the season and are giving us something to think about here for the new year. So we'll break all that down for you on the show. Before we do that, I do have to tell you this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Michelle, time to get started here on the show. Lamar Jackson. We've been looking at this guy all season long. I know he's been a bit up and down, but when everyone needed him the most, he didn't even run for all that many yards. 35 rushing yards, all he needed against the Dolphins. He goes 321-5, very reminiscent of his MVP season, the first game against the Dolphins when he lit them up. So he is up to QB3 overall. Is he in the conversation here for fantasy MVP? I know he's going to probably be the real MVP at this point.
No, I don't think he can be fantasy MVP because I'm thinking a lot of teams that had Lamar Jackson, they had to take him pretty early in the draft, right? He went through that stretch of really bad fantasy games. So there's a solid chance, like they weren't even in contention for the playoffs, right? If you rostered him, if you did make it still and you had him, then of course he might be like the fantasy playoffs MVP, but can't give it to him for the full season. But what's nice to see is he made it a full year for the fantasy season, at least, without getting injured or an injury that was going to keep him out of a game. And also those games that he was down, right? The poor fantasy weeks, it wasn't really because he performed too poorly. It was just the running backs were stealing all of those rushing touchdowns. We know that was going to bounce back, right? The running backs couldn't steal every touchdown like they were during like that 5-game span. So next year he's going to finish as a top 3 guy again, be drafted early, and he'll be a good pick next year.
Yeah, because we were debating a lot of that middle tier, right? I mean, and he kind of jumped Patrick Mahomes. He got into the big 3 with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. That was the big 3, not Mahomes, right? Who produced. I mean, Hurts and Allen did their thing, and partly because of their running, right? Let's be honest here. Hurts really relying on the running. Allen actually sneakily had to do a lot of rushing and touchdowns to really save a lot of the games. I mean, he was terrible this past weekend against the Patriots, but again, when he scored multiple rushing touchdowns, you're going to save the day. But that's what I love about Lamar is that you got it done in a more traditional way. I know he still ran for yards and he had that impact, but you're seeing Lamar like we've never seen him before in terms of just being confident, having all the weapons. That's been key as well. Zay Flowers has been a game changer, and Isaiah Likely. And keep in mind, he didn't have Mark Andrews for a good chunk of the season. He was putting up some numbers here. So love the offensive transition. It's paid off in reality. It's paid off in fantasy as well for Lamar Jackson. So again, QB3 finish is pretty darn good. So you got a little bit of value. Like you said, Michelle, you had to take him a little bit early, but maybe got him a 2-notch higher than where he should have finished maybe with our early projections. Now, Jordan Love, Michelle, we said Jordan Love and Sam Howell before the season. We made bold predictions, both of us, that these guys would both finish in the top 12. Well, that's happened. Sam Howell faded a little bit down the stretch and had kind of the wall hit there, taking all the sacks. But Jordan Love finishes as QB5 overall in scoring. He starts every game, replacing Aaron Rodgers here. And really, what I liked about it is there was some improvement steady. It was a little bit inconsistent, so we can't put him in the MVP conversation either. But what a big game for him. 256 and 3. They're in the air against the Vikings. He also had another rushing TD. He had quite a few of those to pad his stats. He didn't put up a lot of numbers. But what I liked about him is he got it done with different guys, right? He kind of settled into Tucker Kraft and Jayden Reed. Now he's going to have Christian Watson back and Romeo Doubs and Luke Musgrave and Dontavian Wicks. There's starting to be some weapons here that are even more appealing than what we had with Aaron Rodgers near the end. So I think Jordan Love's going to keep this up, and it's pretty big, and I think the Packers have their starting quarterback.
Yeah, I think they have their starting quarterback. I don't know if he's going to be an amazing quarterback in the league, but he's getting better each game. He's really progressing. I like what I'm seeing out of him. I mean, because for the first, 3/4 of the fantasy season, it was FEMA, right? He still has finished outside the top 12 in 9 weeks. So I do think he's going to go too high in fantasy drafts next year because of how he's finished amazingly. And that's cool and all. I think he'll go around 8th, 9th round pick. And that's kind of what we're trying to stay away from, right, this year. But we ended up getting some nice production out of Dak Prescott, who went in that area. So maybe Jordan Love can be the Dak Prescott of next year. But then what about Brock Purdy as well? These two have been up and down this season. I think both will go much higher drafted next year. Which one would you be looking at and having more confidence in to have a bigger fantasy season next year?
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like the established weapons are there, you have to say Brock Purdy. You could also see some attrition. Might hit Christian McCaffrey as he had a big workload here. It's really hard to replicate that, so they might have to do a little bit more in the air, where I don't know if the Packers are going to be as pass happy, right? They're going to fix their running game in some form, and those touchdowns can go back and forth in Green Bay. We've seen it with Aaron Rodgers, right? The first year wasn't that great. Aaron Jones was scoring all the touchdowns, and Rodgers got them, and then so that's kind of fickle there in Green Bay. Where I look at the 49ers, they're going to have that balance, that steady balance. McCaffrey may not score as much, so that opens it up. Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk were both top 12 half-point PPR wide receivers, so that's great for Purdy, of course. The only team I think that had that in the top 12 this year. The Eagles didn't quite get there. Some other teams did not do that. So he's got the weapons. As long as that trio with George Kittle is intact, I think you have to say that. But look, the upside of these Packers guys are looking good maybe going forward. So we'll see if they can recreate that type of offense with Matt LaFleur. But look, right now you have to say it's Purdy.
Yeah, I do think Purdy will probably go higher than Love too. I'm scared about how high Purdy's price will be next year. And that probably will take me off of him because he doesn't really have that rushing upside at all. And we saw even with a Patrick Mahomes, when you have a slightly down year as a passer, you don't have the rushing upside. It really limits you in fantasy. Yeah. But let's talk about a guy who does have a huge rushing upside, right? And has finished the season amazingly. Justin Fields has a great week again in the fantasy championship. If you had him, he finished as the quarterback 3 on the week, but he's now finished as a quarterback 2 and 3 in 3 of the last 4 weeks. Like, great finish to the season. He's finished as a top 2 quarterback in 5 of his last 8 games played, full 8 games played this year. But I'm willing to buy into him again next year. But do you think he'll be the quarterback for the Bears next year? That's the question, because the Bears have officially clinched that number 1 draft pick in the draft with the Panthers getting that spot.
Yeah, this is a tough one, Michelle. I mean, there's no doubt that the Bears got better as the season got long, and it wasn't just their offense, obviously, right? Their defense and Montez Sweat got better, good scheming, and Matt Eberflus took over the play calling. They had a lot of health back there, but they're winning games, and Justin Fields is doing what it takes to win games, right? Running when he needs to. I think he's found a better balance with taking off and running and throwing downfield. DJ Moore, I mean, he was a wide receiver top 5 here because of this combination with Fields. So they were on the right track, right? They made this blockbuster trade, added DJ Moore. It paid off big time, and it really helped their defense because they got some extra assets. They can afford to make the Montez Sweat trade. So I don't know how you say goodbye to Justin Fields if you're the Bears. Like, I think you have some winning potential with him. Why not use that first pick overall? And they also have their own pick, which is number 10. Get Marvin Harrison Jr. Get some offense line help. Now you don't need to work on your defense as much. I thought, okay, the Bears certainly are going to have to invest a lot, but that Sweat pickup, they needed a pass rusher. That takes pressure off, right? Now they can add more weapons. Darnell Mooney's not going to be there, but you have a good basis already with Cole Kmet backing up DJ Moore. So get another receiver. Don't make it Chase Claypool. Somebody else out there that can help him. Get a few more weapons in there. Khalil Herbert has some upside in the backfield. If he can stay healthy with Roshan Johnson, this could be a very dynamic offense next year. And keep in mind, it's very Packers-like, right? There's that connection that we saw with Luke Getsy. So maybe they'll keep everyone around and Fields will build on that. So I think the only place that I would really feel great about Fields and I would follow him is Atlanta, right? If he could go to Atlanta, I would love it. Drake London,
I will say Atlanta if Arthur Smith is gone. I don't Atlanta would be a garbage spot if Arthur Smith is still there. But hopefully he's not the coach. My dream scenario, well, I think he should stay with the Bears. I think they should build around him and use that up. But if he doesn't stay there and they do trade him, the dream scenario is that Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Lions, gets hired as the Falcons head coach. They trade for Fields. That would be the dream.
Yeah, we can only hope, Michelle. That would be great. And then I think Justin Fields might be that guy who finishes the top 3 next year if all that plays out. So we'll see. There was also a great wide receiver kind of scoring pattern that occurred here late in the season. It was very interesting to me when I looked at the final results there, and Tyreek Hill no longer the number 1, which is shocking to everybody. We'll get to who that number 1 was, plus some other guys that really surprised in our next segment. Then we'll close looking at some running back surprises and things that were on our mind here. Before we do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about FanDuel Sportsbook. Okay, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel. And look, if you're not in the action yet, you still have a couple more chances here with the playoffs coming just around the regular season. And of course, you got other sports you can look at as well. So it's wrapping up time in the NFL, but there's a lot of action that you can still enjoy with FanDuel. Again, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, such as live same-game parlays, bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays and string together multiple bets, and a lot more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup or touchdown or whatever sports metaphor you want to use. Just go to FanDuel and get there and get that money and get winning there. And again, the NFL season, we have all the way through the Super Bowl. Enjoy that. So FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, it is time to look at some wide receivers of note. Now, CeeDee Lamb, he might be in the running for fantasy MVP, Michelle, because if you got him in the second round or later, you just dominated. Because look, this guy throughout the playoffs looked great all throughout the season. 227 yards he drops on the Lions. He was the one thing going all the time. Ton of targets, catches 13. He passes Tyreek Hill, had a modest game there against the Ravens, for the #1 spot in half-point PPR. It's incredible. But CeeDee Lamb, I didn't think this season was coming in this offense, but man, they just decided we can't run. All these other receivers are questionable other than Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks from time to time. CD, here's the ball. And Dak Prescott and him, the chemistry was off the charts here. And I'm really excited to see where we might take CeeDee Lamb in 2024.
I mean, he had a slow start weeks 1 through 5, right? It was averaging just 7 targets a game. I had only 1 touchdown during that time. But since week 6, averaging 117 receiving yards per game, 12 targets per game, nearly a touchdown per game, and 27 fantasy points per game in full PPR. That is 11 game sample size. That's absurd. He leads the NFL with 168 targets this season, and there's no reason to believe that's going to change next year. Like, they brought in Brandon Cooks, a good veteran wide receiver, to play against Lamb, and I think that helped the Cowboys overall, but didn't hurt Lamb at all, right? So I don't, unless they bring in some huge name, CeeDee Lamb is just going to, he needs to be a top 5 pick next year.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. Maybe we're underselling a little bit based on his role in the offense. Really, no one else is there. And like, yeah, we'll monitor who do they add, right? If it's somebody that's, and Brand Cooks at this point is just a complimentary player, right? He's bounced around several teams. He's not like that number 2 that's dominant, right? It's not that type. It's not an A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith situation. Some guy that can take over the game and leave Lamb maybe having a head-scratching effort. That's not the case. So Lamb, I really like the comparisons to DeAndre Hopkins when he was coming out of Oklahoma. And you're seeing that, right? He can get open all over the field, just target him, throw to him wherever he's at, and he's going to make big plays. So CeeDee Lamb, among the conversation pieces for league winner. Now, I think there's a battle between 2 teammates for waiver pickup of the year. It's not even close. And maybe it's not even close between these 2 guys. But Puka Nacua, I do love this. I mean, he finishes wide receiver 6 and half-point PPR, has a monster finish the last 2 games, makes big plays. Could have been even bigger if he had gotten that 80-yard play into the end zone, a few more yards there against the Giants. It would have been insane the last 2 weeks that he put up here. So when you look at Puka Nacua, this kid's the real deal. We said, what is he going to do? Cooper Kupp, and Cooper Kupp had his days, right? He had a few 100-yard games and some production and some scoring, but Puka Nacua, 5 for 118, special receiver. We haven't seen this with any receiver as a rookie ever in terms of the yardage and catches, right? So he was special. He came out of nowhere, and look, this Rams offense is humming. I don't think he's going anywhere. He's headed to be the number 1, right, with Kupp getting a little older.
Yeah, I mean, who even knows with Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford? I mean, there's been retirement rumors about both of these guys, right? I would be shocked if either of them hung it up after this year, especially with how they're playing at the end of the season. But I guess that's a question around Puka for next year. Is it Matthew Stafford? Is he still there? Because I mean, we saw him without Stafford this year, and hopefully they would have a better option than, I don't remember who played at this moment. Was it Ripien?
Yeah, Brett Rippon. He's already gone. He's on his
it won't be him. So at least it'll be someone better either way. But if it's Matthew Stafford again, I mean, Puka just looks so good. He looks like he belongs in the NFL. So he's going to be a high pick next year as well. But there was other rookie wide receivers that had really nice, especially ending of the year, right? We had Rashee Rice have another great game in week 17. Jordan Addison has had his huge blowups this year. Jaden Reed has had trouble staying fully healthy, but has had some nice games as of late. And then Zay Flowers seems to really be building that connection with Lamar Jackson. So this group of rookie wide receivers is looking really strong for 2024. Which of those guys I just named gets you most excited for their sophomore season next year for fantasy?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but looking at it, I mean, Zay Flowers probably have Mark Andrews back. Rashee Rice, obviously playing with Mahomes, is pretty high. Here, Jaden Reed, however, just looked like the guy. He was making plays all over the field. And there's some comparisons you can make, again, with that 49ers and Packers offense. Jaden Reed was pretty much treated like Deebo Samuel, right? They were using him all over the field, letting him score rushing touchdowns. So I do think Jaden Reed has the highest upside, even though there's a lot of younger guys there, right? But clearly Jordan Love's play was tied a lot to Jaden Reed, and he's going to be the guy going forward. They just use him all over the field. So I like that. I say Rashee Rice is next, but we have to see what happens with Travis Kelce. Now, if Kelce decides, okay, there's some bigger things here that I need to move on to in life, then it could be Rashee Rice being the number 1 target. And Jordan Addison, he's always going to be held a little bit at bay with Justin Jefferson, right? And Zay Flowers, again, there are some other guys that can be effective. So if I had to go in order, I would go Reed, Rice, Addison, and Flowers there in the way I was targeting these guys. And then don't forget, Michelle, your guy, George Pickens, after that game, he finished as wide receiver 20. We were mostly benching this guy, but 2 big weeks pushed him with a wide receiver 20, Nico Collins at wide receiver 17. These were some of the younger breakouts that weren't rookies. So I think it's really nice that these guys did all this as rookies. It really bodes well for their upside to finish as really strong wide receiver 2s, maybe some wide receiver 1s as well.
Yeah. So with Rashee Rice, I think he's a guy that I'm really going to be looking to target next year if his price doesn't go crazy. It's
Right.
really nice to always see in a rookie season progression, right? And that's what we've seen out of Rice. The last 6 weeks, we've seen his playing time increase where they're really trusting him. It's gone up to almost 80% of the team snaps over the last 6 weeks when it was well below 60% for the weeks 1 through 11. And he's averaging 18 and a half fantasy points per game in PPR during that span, 7th in fantasy points per game among wide receivers since week 12, behind only CeeDee, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Rashee Rice over this last handful of games has been so clutch. And it doesn't really matter to me what happens with Travis Kelce. They still need 2 targets, right? So I think Rashee Rice will be a huge part of this offense next year. And then with George Pickens, him finishing as wide receiver 20 just shows you how small of a sample size an NFL season really is, that a couple big games can skew the data this much. That's why it's really important to look at week by week and like kind of see like what they did throughout the year before you make your decisions moving forward. But George Pickens, I mean, it's all going to matter is Kenny Pickett the quarterback next year? Because if Kenny Pickett's back, no thank you to the Steelers playmakers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is there's a lot of variables there. I mean, Mason Rudolph basically put him over the top. He was probably buried among the wide receiver threes until the last 2 weeks. And then looking at Nico Collins, I mean, he has the quarterback, right? I mean, CJ Stroud, Nico Collins are going to be together hopefully for a long time with Tank Dell. So we really like that. Now, if CJ Stroud was with George Pickens, we would be way in on George Pickens here. So, you have to consider the quarterback in a lot of these situations. But we know quarterback is not the be-all, end-all because, again, the quarterbacks that started for many teams were not the quarterbacks who began this as a starter. So, again, you have to look at the individuals a little bit more. But, yeah, definitely you want to see that Steelers quarterback situation. I think it's going to be a big talking point whether they make the playoffs or not here in 2023.
Yeah, and that'll be big on all of them, especially Najee Harris. He's performing way better with Mason Rudolph as well. But we'll get into other running backs that had big performances in the last week of the championship and what we think about them moving forward. But first, let's talk about another one of our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Prize Pick app. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Prize Picks adds a ton of excitement to the sports viewing experience. Players can choose from a vast selection of sports and stat types not offered anywhere else. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted and will not count against your picks. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. We all know how important that is in the NFL. When players are getting hurt left and right, you don't want your picks to be ruined by an injury, and on Prize Picks they are not. Vinnie and I will go through our favorite Prize Picks of the week on our Friday show, as we always do. But if you want to get in on the action for this week's slate of games prior to our Friday show, all you have to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Vinny, let's talk about the real MVP here. And he would be for fantasy MVP if he had missed those 4 games, right? But it's Kyren Williams of the Rams. You're talking about Puka Nacua being the best waiver pickup of the year, right, with teammate Kyren Williams. I mean, deciding between those two would be a toughie, but Kyren Williams has just been absolutely amazing. Finishes as the running back overall, but again, he missed 4 games. He was the running back 2 in fantasy points per game this season, behind only Christian McCaffrey. So it was Christian McCaffrey, then Kyren Williams, and a large gap between fantasy points between him and the 3rd Alvin Kamara and 4th Raheem Mostert.
Yeah, that tells you something right there, right? I mean, okay, McCaffrey was the first running back ranked in a lot of cases. He came through, but when you say Kyren Williams and then Alvin Kamara, who also missed games with a suspension, and then Raheem Mostert, who was well over 30, and we didn't think he was going to do a lot. I mean, that kind of tells you something about running backs, right? They're all over the board here, but Kyren Williams, again, it's going to be a little tough to pay up for Kyren Williams. He's a little slight of build there, and we know how fickle Sean McVay can be with his back. So I'm a little concerned about maybe overpaying for Kyren Williams. Also, he was scoring a lot of touchdowns, right? And he wasn't a big part of their passing game. Not dissing Kyren Williams. He's still going to be an RB1 that we target if the Rams depth chart doesn't change all that much. But the guy that I think I'd rather have next year, assuming Aaron Rodgers is in the mix, is Breece Hall. He's up to RB8, and he had 126 yards from scrimmage in that tough matchup against the Browns when the Jets looked pretty awful overall. He also scored another touchdown. They figured out how to use him. Unfortunately, Nathaniel Hackett is always going to be there and maybe limiting Breece Hall. But look, if they move forward here, I mean, they moved on from Michael Carter, so he was in the mix. I think they're clearly going to say goodbye to Dalvin Cook. You'll see Israel Abanikanda. He's pretty good, but this looks like it's Breece Hall's backfield the way it should be here, and none of this stuff with Dalvin or any of this stuff with Aaron Rodgers. I think I have to go with Breece Hall next year as the guy I'm going to target a little bit more than Kyren Williams.
Yeah, I think I'd still stick with the Kyren Williams, depending on free agency, right? But it does seem like Sean McVay is all the way in on Kyren Williams.
Yeah.
As soon as he got back from injury, it wasn't even a question like, oh, are we going to keep feeding Rice Freeman or keep Darrell Henderson? It was like, no, we're going right back to Kyren Williams, feeding him everything. And when he does have one guy to rely on, he does give him everything. So for another year, if Kyren Williams is a top guy and they don't sign some big name free agent, I'm going to be super high on Kyren Williams next year. Breece Hall just comes down to the health of Aaron Rodgers. This Jets offense is one that's really hard to trust. The saddest note I came across while prepping for this podcast is that Garrett Wilson has the third most targets in the NFL this season, behind only CeeDee Lamb and Devontae Adams, who also struggled on his targets. But 163 targets, and Garrett Wilson was a very disappointing fantasy asset because the offense is just so bad and quarterback stink. But if Aaron Rodgers is back healthy, then Breece Hall, also another year removed from injury, he's going to go high, right? He's going to be a high draft pick, and he's been looking better as of late. And like you said, thank goodness they are giving up on Dalvin Cook. He needs to go. Travis Etienne, though, on the other hand, he came through big time in the final week after not doing much of anything for a long time. I mean, he had a lot of down weeks there, was disappointing, but what do we do with him next year, right? Because a handful of really good weeks this year, mostly due to touchdowns, and then a handful of really, really bad weeks. Should he be considered as one of the top running backs for next year?
Yeah, in theory, yes. But again, why I might actually prefer Breece Hall is because Travis Etienne doesn't get involved in the passing game as much as you would like. And you think that would have been his key role here. He's a very explosive runner, and you're right. He's a little bit big play and big touchdown dependent. And their usage is kind of weird with him, right? In these tougher matchups, they kind of disappear. With that, we needed him this week. There was no Trevor Lawrence. We have a great matchup against the Panthers. We're going to use him this week. And we didn't see that momentum from that Bills game. Remember in London where he just exploded? We thought, okay, he's going to just carry this team the rest of the way. That didn't quite happen here. So I think the usage of Travis Etienne, the one thing I'll say that's positive is like, we heard about Dearness Johnson, Tank Bigsby. None of that stuff happened. Travis Etienne was still the man. Now, basically, it comes down to a few running backs that you would say compete with Christian McCaffrey, if you're thinking that with his age, as being the top pick at that position. You have Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs there in the mix. I think I'd much rather have Bijan, Gibbs, even Kyren Williams, and Hall right now, based on where Etienne is offensively and based on the way that offense runs.
Oh, for sure. I think I really like Travis Etienne. Don't get me wrong. And I was in on him this year, and I didn't care about Bigsby or any of those other, just another guy. But the same part, like you just said, he's too inconsistent for me, too dependent on touchdowns. And for whatever reason, he's not used as a receiving option enough. Right.
Yeah.
So he'll definitely be a good chunk down from those top guys you just mentioned. And CMC it's going to stay at number one, like Travis Kelce. Guys,
until we see it.
Until we see him kind of crash down. But one guy we haven't seen crash down fully yet, James Conner. He's going to be 29 years old next season, right? But the last 4 weeks, he's finished as a top 12 running back, had a huge week in week 17. And things are moving along with Kyler Murray as the quarterback for the Cardinals. But James Conner, 29 years old, I know he's finished the season on such a high note, but what do we do with him at that age? Is he still going to be scoring touchdowns and breaking off big runs?
Yeah, it was crazy that he finished 4 straight games, basically in the top 5 for 3 of those. And then the other game, he was 11th there in half-point PPR scoring. So he was amazing. And there were some tough matchups along the way that he came through, including the 49ers. So he looked good. And I think part of it is the scheming of this offense. It's Drew Petzing. He came over from the Browns. We know the Browns running backs have been very productive. So that was that offense. And I don't think you really saw the true Cardinals offense for a while, right? They were kind of Josh Dobbs, go make plays until you can't anymore. And they were like, okay, Clayton Tune plays. But they didn't get Kyler Murray to settle, remember? I mean, he's recovering from the injury. He didn't have enough practice time. They didn't really get to install their offense. And then I think in Philadelphia, obviously, with the big upset, we saw what their potential is. And this is even without Marquise Hollywood Brown out there. And I think they'll move on. I mean, this is kind of an indication of what this offense is going to look next year like. I mean, with Greg Dortch, he's an underrated receiver. And you look at what Trey McBride can do. Those are really 2 great established weapons. I think Michael Wilson can be better, and that's going to open things.
Yeah, they definitely need to add wide receivers, right? And they can. They're going to have an early draft pick. Maybe they land one of those top wide receivers in this draft class, but that should only help out the running game. I think James Conner might have one more good year in him and then move on from him after that.
Yeah. So it was a fun time this season, as unpredictable as always, and some results that we saw coming, some that we completely did not see coming here in 2023. We're going to move on and look a little bit into week 18 if you're playing DFS and all that. So we'll look at how we like the running backs with some guys resting and quarterbacks as well, and then look at wide receivers, tight ends, and we'll still look at our favorite flex plays, deep sleepers, and price picks this week. So we'll do that normally, and then we'll start to turn the page here and look at some playoff fantasy as well. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.